whether you listen or not, and I hope you listen. I came here today for a very simple reason. I need your help. That's why I'm here. For the last 41 months, I have been on a mission to change the conversation and the culture around mental illness, so we can finally talk about it, normalize it, destigmatize it. It's way past time, by the way. And if we're going to do that, your generation will do it. I love your generation, by the way, I mean that. You are the least judgmental generation in the history of the United States. And if we're going to change that conversation that I'm committed to doing, I'll need your help to do it. I grew up in Massachusetts. I'm sorry about that, but that's where I'm from. Somebody has to grow up in Massachusetts. Woo! I'm a baby boomer, not that you could have ever guessed that. And when I was a kid, no one ever talked about mental illness. No one talked about it. This wasn't a subject that ever came up. I lived in a town of 20,000 people. If you had asked me as a kid if everyone in my town had perfect mental health, I would have said, of course they do. I also would have told you every marriage in my town was happy. That's the bubble I'm from. I don't live there now. When I was 10 years old, my best friend lived right across the street from my house, and my father was a high school science teacher, and my mother worked in an office in the neighboring town. My friend's father was a graduate of MIT. In my childhood, in my neighborhood, MIT was rock star status. My best friend's uncle, his father's brother, never graduated from high school. He was an inpatient at the Danvers Mental Hospital in Danvers, Massachusetts. Every adult I ever heard speak of that place, and every kid, including me, used to call it the nut house. We thought that was funny, apparently. Nobody was embarrassed to say that. All these years later, looking back, I think we all should have been embarrassed. I think now the people confined or treated there, and all the people that love those people, but that's what we call it. And in the summertime, often on Sundays, my friend's father would pick his brother up at the nut house and bring him to their house across the street. I was 10 years old. I can still see that man standing by the side of the garage, looking at the flowers, sometimes walking around the yard. He never looked at me, never gestured, never spoke. But I thought he was pretty scary. He was, after all, in the nut house. And on those warm Sundays, I never had the courage to leave the safety of my front yard. That's how I viewed it, by the way, to play with my friend. I just didn't. And when that man left my neighborhood late on those warm Sundays, I felt a sense of relief. Because even as a kid, I knew, since everyone in my town had perfect mental health, that I would never know anyone or see anyone the rest of my life who was suffering. I was wrong about that. Which is one of the reasons I've devoted most of my waking hours, with the help and support of Dartmouth-Hitchcock, speaking wherever I'm asked for the last 41 months on this topic. It's the most important work I've ever done, and I do not say that to you lightly. This means more to me than anything I've ever done, because I see it now. Some decades after that childhood I described to you, in a different state, namely New Hampshire, in a different community, Manchester, and on a road somewhat different than the one I grew up on, mental illness crossed that road from my childhood and took up residence in my own house. My wife and I are both baby boomers, so we didn't know anything about mental illness. I had two sons, 11 and 13, and took up residence in my 13-year-old son. He didn't know he had a mental health problem, and it makes sense when you think about it. How would you know that? Just how you feel, how you respond to others and the world around you. But he was suffering. He just thought it was him, and we didn't see it. When he graduated from junior high school, it was on a Saturday. He woke up that day and told my wife and I he didn't want to go to his graduation. And we thought, well, he's just lazy, summer's here. That wasn't why, by the way, but we wouldn't know it for quite a while. He went, but he wasn't that happy about it. He was a really talented artist, and so he spent a lot of time as a kid in his bedroom with the door closed at his desk drawing. Today I would describe it as withdrawing. But I was pretty ignorant about mental illness back then. I'm not ignorant now. My son started smoking in the 9th grade. I didn't know that. Kept that pretty well hidden. He had friends at Trinity High School in Manchester where he went, but not as many as his younger brother, who was 2 years behind him. If you look at the yearbook for the year he graduated, you'll find his photograph with all the other graduates. But if you look through the yearbook, at the candid shots, at the football games, the dances, the school plays, you won't see him in those shots because he wasn't at those places. He's probably home drawing or withdrawing. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. He did okay in high school, not as well as he could have. I always thought he was much smarter than his grades, but he always tested pretty well. And he got into a pretty good college in New York, and then off he went. And I don't know if it's a rumor, maybe it's true, you guys might know, but I hear sometimes when kids go to college, they drink. Have you heard that? It could be true. I'm not recommending it, I'm just noting it. In my son's case, it was true. I could hear it on some of those weekend phone calls. It was pretty alarming. I could hear it in his voice. I'd mention it to him, he'd say, Dad, I don't have a drinking problem, we don't need to talk about it. Over time, we'd be on that campus, and eventually his friends would seek us out to express their concerns about his drinking. We'd talk to him about it, he'd say, Dad, I don't know why they say that, I don't drink more than anybody else. I thought he must have, but I couldn't prove it or disprove it. He looked more disheveled to us than when he was living at home, and I chalked it up to being away at college for the first time. That wasn't why, by the way, but we didn't see that then. He did okay in college, not as well as he could have. He got a college degree. Knowing what I now know, I am in awe of him. I don't know how he did that. He must have willed himself to that degree. He got into a pretty good graduate school in Boston, and then he moved home. We were living in Manchester. And he lived with us. He commuted 3 days a week to class. And once he was home and living with us, it was pretty quickly obvious he was drinking almost every day. He tried to hide it, tried to flip his life so we wouldn't notice it, but he really couldn't. He had to go to class. We talked to him about it. He didn't want to talk about it. Dad, I don't have an alcohol problem. We don't need to discuss it. We must have talked about it too much because he moved north to Boston for the last 6 months of school. He got a master's degree. Knowing what I now know, I have no idea how he did that. And he got a job pretty quickly, which wasn't surprising. He's really smart. Really smart. He can talk to you about the Red Sox and Mookie Betts. He can talk to you about Aristotle, too, not because he's read about him, but because he's read Aristotle. He may be the best read person I've ever known. He was handsome and funny. He's a self-taught musician. He's a terrific artist. So it wasn't surprising he got a job so quickly, but it was surprising it only lasted 4 weeks. It wasn't his fault. He said he lost the job. The next job took longer and lasted for less time, but it wasn't his fault. He lost the job. And then he moved home. And he was drinking every day, trying to hide it. He got part-time jobs, hourly rate jobs, not the kind of job you'd expect for somebody with his skills and intelligence. He took graphic design classes wherever he could. He always excelled in those. But his drinking did deteriorate. It got worse and worse and worse. My wife and I finally reached out to the alcohol people and told them what I told you here. And they didn't hesitate, by the way. They said, Judge, your son is an alcoholic. That's what's going on here. And you and your wife better start dealing with that. So my wife and I started going to Al-Anon classes for family members of alcoholics. My son thought that was ridiculous. He said, Dad, I'm not an alcoholic. If I didn't have these feelings, I wouldn't be drinking. We mentioned that to the alcohol people. They didn't hesitate. Judge, every alcoholic has a reason they drink. He's an alcoholic. At the end of the day, you and your wife are going to have a choice to make. You can either put him out of your house, literally out, hope he hits bottom and turns his life around, or you can let him stay in your house. He's going to die drinking in your house. Not tomorrow or next week or even next year, but you can't drink like he's drinking and have a long life. And we didn't like those choices. So we persuaded my son, who did not have an alcohol problem, to go to a rehab for alcohol. That was better than making that choice. And up to this point, by the way, no doctor, no family member, no teacher, no neighbor, no friend, and sadly not us, ever said, I wonder if he could have a mental health problem. He majored in alcohol rehab, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Cape Cod. Finally, he went to Florida, and my wife and I were praying that he would have some insight about his drinking. I picked him up at Logan Airport several weeks later, and on the way to the car, he told me he'd been drinking on the plane on the way home, so it didn't take. I was on the Supreme Court at the time, and I would drive every day from Manchester, where we lived, to Concord, where the court is. On the way up, on the way home, and probably for much of the day, I was thinking we had failed him somehow. His younger brother had just gotten his master's degree, had recently been married. He was moving ahead with his life, as you would hope, but my oldest son, with all his talent, was going backwards at 100 miles an hour, and he couldn't even see that, and we couldn't stop it. And finally, my wife and I had to make that decision, which we had not wanted to make. Really didn't seem like any decision at all, but it was hard to do. And so finally, we decided to put my son out. And we loved our son, but it seemed like the only solution. And so we put him out. He lived on the streets for 3 weeks. He slept in his car, he slept at the shelter, he ate at the soup kitchen, continued to drink. He called us a couple of times from the sidewalk, wanting to come home, and we said no. We said, no, you can't come home. And after 3 weeks of that agony and dreading that phone call, trust me, that no parent ever wants to get, we brought him home. Knowing what they told us that would mean, but we're always hoping for a miracle, and anyway, we thought at least he'll be with us. And when he came home, he was drinking just as much as when we put him out. Knowing what I know now, I'm sure his underlying mental health problems, which I didn't see and he couldn't verbalize, but I didn't have these feelings then. I'm sure his underlying mental health problems exploded on the street. I'm sure he thought we had thrown him away. And because his behavior was no different, I'm sure he thought we'd put him out again, and he knew he couldn't do that. He couldn't go back out. And I think one night he snapped. He was drinking, and he assaulted me. I have no memory of that, but my wife does. I went to the ICU at the Elliott Hospital in Manchester. I was in the ICU for 6 or 8 days. Not that I recall any of that. My master's educated, smart, handsome, talented, decent son was arraigned in a public courtroom before a lot of press, issued an orange jumpsuit and went to the Valley Street Jail in Manchester. Trust me when I tell you, you don't want to go to that place. And you never want to go there if your father's a judge. I wasn't really popular at the jail, but I didn't know any of that then. My wife had told me it was all over the news in New Hampshire and Boston. They wrote about it in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times. When I was in the ICU, my doctors went on the Today Show, talking about how I was doing. So I wasn't exactly below the radar, but I didn't know any of that. My wife did. It was late March, early April. She said for the first 3 days there were satellite trucks outside the hospital. She'd go home every night and put her hood up. She said, I'd erase every message we received that day. I didn't call anybody back. What would I have said to them? What would I have told them? She later told me she visited my son when I was in the ICU. I cannot imagine what that was like for her. She went to the jail and talked on a telephone with plexiglass between them. His ankles were shackled. He was wearing a jumpsuit. She said he was really upset. He said, Mom, is Dad okay? Just tell me he's going to be okay. I don't know why I did that to Dad. I could never forgive myself. In the early days, she didn't know if I was okay. He said, Mom, they don't allow visitors here very often, but on the days when you can't come, if you could go to the cemetery, I can see the corner of the cemetery from my cell. If you went there at 3 o'clock on those days we agreed on, I could at least see you. And I know my family hadn't abandoned me. And so my wife by herself would drive to that street corner. It was kind of dreary. And she'd park the car, she told me, get out and wave at the jail, give them a thumbs up sign. She said, I didn't know what floor, what window, or even if she was looking back. And she said, I'd drive home, I'd cry all the way home. I didn't know any of that then. After 6 or 8 days, I remember being wheeled down a corridor at the Elliott Hospital. Somebody was pushing me on a stretcher. The first time I knew I was in the hospital, I said to him, what am I doing here? He said, I think you fell. I felt pretty sore if someone had fallen, but I didn't have any other information. They brought me up to the top floor. I had this big room. And by the way, if you ever visit people in the hospital, try not to say to them, I love your room. Okay? Try not to say that. People, I hated my room. But there I was. And I couldn't get out of bed for 2 days, literally. And after about a day and a half, my wife and I were finally alone. No nurses, no doctors, no visitors. And she told me as best she knew what had happened, that I hadn't fallen. And she told me where our son was. And we just cried. I've been a judge and a lawyer my entire professional life. So I knew what that meant for him, for us, for his brother. If I had any understanding at all, would it have been that alcohol, when it's abused, can take people to bad places. That's what I thought. I don't know the technical definition of hopelessness, but I know what it feels like. That's exactly what it feels like. I couldn't even get out of bed. If I had been able to do it, I couldn't have gone home with my wife. I couldn't even reach my son. I just had a lot of hours to lie there and think. When I got out of the hospital, they wouldn't allow me to visit my son at the jail. I would have, but the court wouldn't allow it. So my wife would go twice a week. She'd come home crying every time. Eventually friends would go who had known my son since he was little to give her a break. After 6 months, my son was taken one morning from the Valley Street Jail to the Hillsborough County Superior Court in the center of Manchester to a basement courtroom, no windows, so he could be sentenced to the state prison. I hope you don't have that day in your life. I would have bet you anything I might ever do or own when I was your age. That could never be my family. I would have bet anything in the world that couldn't be true. It was true that day. My wife and I were in the public section behind the rail. It was still press, it was still a story. It was a man bites dog story. My son came in that day through a side door of the courtroom with a bailiff at his elbow. He was wearing civilian clothing. I wouldn't see that for years. I stood up and he walked over to me. He looked great. He hadn't had a drink in 6 months. Gave me a big hug and he said, Dad, I'm so sorry. And he held me back on my shoulders to look at me. He said, I don't know why I did that to you, Dad. Just tell me you're going to be okay. I said, tell me I'm going to be fine. I said, look, we must have gotten into this as a family. And we're going to get out of it as a family. I said, if you don't quit, your mother and I won't quit. He said, I won't quit then. And then he was sentenced to 7.5 to 15 years in the state prison. I don't know how we all didn't pass out, to be honest. My master's educated, decent, talented son. He served 6 months at Valley Street, so he wouldn't serve that twice. The court suspended 4 of the 7. Said you can serve those on parole if they're paroled. They may not. But you're definitely going away for 3 years. I asked if we could see him for a minute before he left. The court let us do that. I want to say, get your coat, we're going to go home. But I couldn't. And then off he went to the Concord State Prison. I was on the Supreme Court at the time. 20% of my day job was reviewing appeals from the very people he'd be living with 24/7. It was your child that keep you up at night. After 30 days, I had visitors. First 30 days, I evaluate every new inmate. What are the issues? Where should they live? With whom should they be living? But after 30 days, we were invited up. My son had to allow that. We met in this pure psychiatric unit at the state prison. He wasn't housed there, but that's where the meeting took place. They may do good work there, but it's a sterile, clinical, kind of clicking heels on linoleum feel to it. We met in the conference room and the head psychiatrist and 2 social workers. My son was there, my wife and I. He started the meeting, and the psychiatrist by saying, I've come to know your son over the last month. I really like him. He's really smart. He's got a great sense of humor. He's got every life skill to be a successful person. He's got all those skills. I said, I know that, Doctor. We're in the state prison today. He said, let me tell you what's going on with him. He's got really serious depression and panic attack and anxiety that he described as virtually off the charts. He said, Judge, if you had those problems and alcohol made you feel better every day, you'd be drinking too. So don't be too judgmental about it. It wasn't a good choice. It just made his depression worse. But that's what he was doing. He was self-medicating his mental illness. And he told us that in that place. I knew we had failed him. I was the parent, after all. I should have known something about mental illness. I didn't. I thought all mental illness was essentially hopeless. It's far from hopeless. I know that now. He said, we're going to try to work with this son and turn his life around. I thought the chances were 0. I thought maybe he never was an alcoholic. After 4 months, we visited twice a week. Came out and gave us a big hug as he did every time we visited. He said, Dad, I feel so different. I said, what do you mean different? He said, Dad, my palms aren't sweating. I'm sleeping through the night. I haven't done that since I was really little. I can focus, Dad. My mind's not racing. He said, I'm teaching at the prison. I said, what are they doing for you? He said, I see a counselor here, Dad, pretty regularly. And I take medication at night and in the morning. Changed my life, Dad. I knew I had failed him when he told me that. I should have known something about mental illness. My son remained in prison for 3 years. It would have been like me in prison at that point. I was Chief Justice when he was up for parole. He deserved to be paroled, but I said they won't do it. I'm the Chief Justice, so it looks like they're favoring the judge's son. So don't get your hopes up. They paroled him. He was so good on parole, he was supposed to be on parole for years. The parole officer said after 11 months, why are you on parole? I enjoyed coming to talk to you every month. Something wrong with that picture. My son was excited they might take that away. I said, they won't do that. I was Chief Justice. They eliminated the balance of his parole. My son, who was drinking pretty much every day for years, has not had a drop of alcohol in 15 years. He said, I'm not that guy anymore. I don't feel like that guy I used to feel. You could leave me overnight in the liquor store, Dad, I wouldn't drink. It's true. The day of his parole hearing, my wife and I were outside the prison. A lot of places you're expected to talk about your children. Outside the prison gate, it's not one of them, by the way. They came up with a TV camera, put a microphone like this under my chin, said, you want to say anything? I said, actually I do. We're really happy my son's leaving here and joining his wife. I want to tell you something else. My son's not a bad person who's now suddenly a good person. He's always been a good person. He's now well. And those are very different things, by the way. My son was married in prison. Just pointing that out, if you're making wedding plans, I wouldn't choose that. The only advantage of a prison wedding is the receptions are really inexpensive. What they call that, potato chips. I performed the wedding in the conference room during visiting hours off the main visiting room. The photographer was an inmate with a Polaroid camera. My son said, Dad, don't ask him why he's in prison. People don't ask. I said, I will, but I'm going to ask him the charges. So he said, I charge you $1 a picture, sir. I said, you are my kind of wedding photographer. My son's wife had gotten her master's degree with him in Boston. She was working at Dartmouth at the time. She later won an Emmy in New England. I've held the Emmy statue. It's the real deal. I would keep it, but she won't let me. They have an 11-year-old daughter. She just turned 11. My granddaughter. I couldn't be objective about it, but even if I were, she's a stunningly beautiful child. And every time I hug that little girl, I think, you are a miracle. That first Thanksgiving, my son was home for the first time in 4 years. We were driving to pick something up at the store. He was in the passenger seat, tapping his chest. He said, Dad, have you always felt like this? I said, what do you mean like this? He said, good, I mean that, like I feel. I said, I probably have. I knew I failed it. I should have known something. He said, Dad, when I was in prison, they gave me an IQ test. I knew he was smart, I was curious. So I said, how did you do on that? He said, they told me, Dad, I was 3 points below genius on the IQ test. So I was kidding him, I said, you couldn't be a genius? He said, Dad, my ankles were shackled, they were watching me through a two-way mirror. That must be worth 3 points. So I thought he was a genius. I don't know if he is or not, he's smarter than his father, and I love him. Just so you know, by the way, I wouldn't be here today bothering you if my son said, Dad, stop talking about it. You know what he says to me every time I go out? Dad, I'm really proud of what you're doing. Every room you go in, they have someone suffering, they love someone who's suffering, they know someone who's suffering. I wasn't sure that was true when I started, I know it's true now. And there's no shame in any of it. But I didn't do anything. But in the year after my son was incarcerated, people would come up to me, they'd write about it, they'd recognize my face, and they'd open up to me about their own mental health challenges. My mother, my father, my cousin, my sister, I heard about suicide attempts, I heard about hospitalization. I said to my wife, we're down there in the valley of mental illness, we thought we were alone. A lot of people marching down there, we just never saw them. 4 years ago, I was asked to get involved in the mental health campaign that brings me here today, a hold of it. I hadn't done anything. They called me and said it's a nonpartisan, non-political awareness campaign on mental illness. They asked me to get involved. And to my surprise, I said, sure. I'm from the bubble, by the way. That's not who I am. I got involved. I called the woman whose genius it was. She was a psychologist in Maryland. I said, Barbara, what's the campaign about? Barbara Van Dalen. She said, here it is, John. I want the 5 most common signs of mental illness to be as well known or as widely known as the signs for a heart attack or a stroke. I thought that was genius, by the way, then and now. She said, you probably know many of the signs for a heart attack or a stroke, John. I bet you guys do too. I said, why is that, Barbara? She said, well, it often affects somebody we love. We don't know the reason, so we'll all learn something. We call 911 now. I said, why don't I know the signs of mental illness, Barbara? She said, it's mental illness, John, that's why. People don't talk about it. They're ashamed of it, they're afraid of it, they wall it off. They wouldn't even know what to do if they found it. I got involved. We raised $250,000 in no time. I've been dean of the law school at UNA, so I know what raising money is supposed to feel like. Everyone who gave me money had a mental health story, everyone. We launched this campaign on a work day, Monday morning, May 23rd, 2016, in a state house chamber, the House chamber in Concord. The legislature was not in session. The speaker said to me, you can use the chamber. There were 400 theater-style seats in that room. I thought, we're not going to get that kind of crowd. Maybe we'll fill the first row. So people blasted it out on social media, but I was not optimistic. The morning I arrived there were 425 people who showed up. The Catholic bishop, the Episcopal Church, the Jewish community, 3 members of the Supreme Court, every member of our congressional delegation, our then Governor Maggie Hassan, the Attorney General, hospital CEOs, educators, superintendents. It was stunning. I knew we had touched a nerve that my family hadn't been on. Barbara Van Dalen was here that day, the genius behind the 5 signs. She asked this question of the most impressive room I had seen assembled in 40 years in my life here. This was the question: is anyone in this chamber today who's been untouched by mental illness? Yourself, your family, your extended family, your friends, your classmates, your colleagues, your neighbors. If you've never been touched by it, she said, I'd like you to raise your hand. I had no idea what to expect. Not one hand went up. Not one. Every single person had been touched. I said, Barbara, how's that possible? She said, John, it happens. And she shared these statistics which motivated me, and I didn't know them. I bet you didn't either. but they might explain why I come to every school that invites me. Half of all mental illness in the United States arises by age 14. I didn't know that. My son was 13. 2/3 by age 23. Last year in the United States, more people died by suicide, over 47,000, than died in every car accident across the nation. Every 90 minutes, plus or minus, every day, including this day, some brave American veteran, he or she, takes their own life. We lose 20 veterans a day of suicide in America. Yeah, let's not talk about that. That's kind of awkward. Did you know last year, and for several years before last year, more police officers across the United States died by suicide than every single cause in the line of duty? I didn't know that. I know it now. After that launch, which was so successful, we didn't have a manual, we didn't know what to do next. So we waited to see if anyone would ask us to speak anywhere. In the last 41 months, I've now spoken over 460 times in 4 states, to over 100,000 people. I've driven 75,000 miles. Not about me, by the way. Most of the people who invite me don't know me, will never see me again. It is about this. It has opened my eyes. We can choose to ignore it, or we can finally deal with it. That's why I'm here today. I need your help. One of the first schools I remember going to was Pembroke Academy, outside of Concord. 840 students, 9th through 12th grade, sitting on those comfortable wooden bleachers on both sides of the gym with a 40-foot ceiling. 9 in the morning, I was on a 6-inch riser directly under the basketball net with a fixed podium and a gooseneck microphone, looking out at those high school students, and I thought, this probably won't work here. Maybe they won't be able to hear me. Maybe they don't care what I'm saying. But I was there, I had to speak. I spoke exactly as I've spoken to you. And when I finished speaking, I was uncertain. I thought maybe I need to signal them that I'm not talking anymore. Maybe they don't know I've stopped talking. Anyway, there was 3 seconds of dead silence in that gym. The principal was behind me, and he stepped up on the little 6-inch riser during that silence. I thought, this is really embarrassing. They're probably saying, whose grandfather is this guy, and why is he bothering us? After silence for 3 seconds, which seemed like a minute and a half, almost all at once, 840 kids stood up on both sides of that gym and applauded for almost a minute. Principal said, I'm shocked by this. I said, you're shocked? I said, they're not applauding me. They don't know me. They'll never see me again. These kids agree with me. That's why they're applauding. This generation is different than I was, smarter than I was. Some of these students are suffering, or some are at home, or someone they know. They're tired of the shame too. That's what they're applauding. About 6 weeks later, I was in central New Hampshire at a pretty large high school, again in the gym, in the middle of the gym floor, kids on both sides. And when I finished speaking, they stood up. Not about me, it's about this. A young man walked towards me from the bleachers. He looked like Rob Gronkowski. He's a big guy. He had long shoulder-length hair and a baseball cap on backwards. My first thought was, I hope I haven't upset this guy. He got about 2 feet from my face. His eyes were wet. He said, can I ask you a favor? I said, sure, what? He said, can I give you a hug? I said, you're 6'3"? Sure. He hugged me too. It almost broke me in two. And then he shared his own mental health story. Oh my God. I said to him that day, you may be the bravest guy I'm going to meet in my whole life. And I returned the hug. He said, that'd be great. I'm hugging linebackers I don't know and who don't know me in high school gyms. That ought to tell us something. In the last 41 months, and I mean this literally, I have hugged hundreds and hundreds of kids, grades 6 through 12, who come up with wet eyes, and often cracking voices. Sometimes they can't even speak. Sometimes they say, thanks for sticking up for kids like me. Sometimes they share their own journey. Sometimes they say, I'm ashamed of my mental illness, or my parents are ashamed. I've had students as young as the 7th and 8th grade say, do you know what a cutter is? And looked up their sleeve. How do you ignore that? How do we ignore that? There's no shame in it, by the way. My son always says, Dad, anyone with a mental health problem, I don't care what it is or how old they are, they have two things in common. Number one, they didn't ask for it. That's true. And number two, they don't deserve it. That's true too. So what do the rest of us do? And what have we been doing for generations in America? We make sure they feel badly about it. We stigmatize it. Why do we do that? Every illness from the neck down is treated with empathy, respect, and understanding. From the neck up, oh, maybe it's just you. I mean, if you're a better person, a stronger person, we never say to somebody with diabetes, snap out of it. We say that to people who are depressed. It's a health issue, not a weakness. Every time I speak to groups, I say, we've been stigmatizing mental illness for generations. There's got to be a good reason, I just don't get it. And ignorance and fear are excuses, they're not reasons. So maybe you could share the reason with, no one ever does, by the way. You know what? There is no good reason. My question to you is, why do we tolerate one more day that which we can't even explain and haven't been able to explain for generations? That's where you come in. It doesn't matter what I think or what I've heard. It matters a lot about what you think and what you're willing to say and do. My generation did some great things, but not in this area we didn't. We bought into the cone of silence. You're smarter than I was. I know you are. I know that from my conversations with hundreds and hundreds of your generation. Let me close with this. My purpose of being here today is challenge you to change the culture. We need to. And if you do that, you'll change and save lives. I guarantee you will. And you can do that if you want. When I was a kid, my dad was a teacher. He was paid on Thursdays. He must have been. He always felt flush with cash on Thursdays. And we'd get into his blue Impala Chevrolet. He loved that car. Didn't have seat belts, but they weren't important. And my mother, my sister, my dad, and I would drive to the same little restaurant in our town every Thursday night. Every table in that restaurant had an ashtray. Some had two. At some point during the evening, every table was smoking. My mother and father loved my sister and myself as they blew smoke in our face. After 2 hours in that smoke chamber, clumsily disguised as a restaurant, we got back in my dad's car with no seatbelts, but thank God I had an ashtray. And we'd drive 2 miles home. Every room in my childhood house had an ashtray. My bedroom and my sister's were the only two rooms that didn't. The bathrooms in my house had ashtrays. Every coffee table in America, every auditorium in every school, every teacher's office, every teacher's lounge, every principal's office, every church basement, every airport, every airplane, every automobile had an ashtray. I couldn't wait to become a smoker. Have you seen an ashtray recently? What happened to them? Nothing changed. If you smoke outside today on the Boston Common, outside, it's a violation of the city ordinance. Unimaginable in my childhood. When I was a kid, when I was young, we had a black and white television set. I know what you're thinking, how old is this guy? But that's true. And 3 channels and rabbit ears. We survived. And some of those nights I'd watch the news on that black and white television with my mother. And I'd see African Americans peacefully marching, holding signs, dressed often like I'm dressed. I didn't know why they were marching. I obviously know now. And some nights I would see them knocked to the ground like bowling pins, hit with fire hoses, attacked by police dogs, beaten with billy clubs. Those are memories from my childhood. Pretty alarming memories. I remember saying to my mother, where's that happening? She wasn't proud of it. It was happening in our own country. If you had said to me when I was a kid, after one of those broadcasts, John, do you think in your lifetime somebody who looks like those people will be elected president of the United States? I would have said, are you crazy? Didn't you see that? I'll bet you my ashtray that never happened. Thank you, Barack Obama. You know who elected Barack Obama, by the way? Young people. Young people all across this country who didn't see his color, didn't care what color he was. He inspired them like John F. Kennedy inspired me when I was a kid. I was on the Supreme Court at the time he was elected. My mother had passed by then, but her voice remained. And as I was watching Obama and his family in Grant Park that November night, my mother said to me, "You better be down there for that inauguration." She would have been, by the way. She would have been so proud of this country on that night. And so I bought an airline ticket. I didn't know Senator Obama. I never shook his hand or met him. It had been 232 years. Think about that. This had never happened in the United States. That's more rare than a toe with clips. So I bought a ticket. I flew to Washington. I stood there with 1.4 million of my closest friends that day. I wanted to feel that history. And I'm glad I went. I was so far from President-elect Obama, he looked 2 inches tall. So I watched it mostly on the Jumbotron, where he was 15 feet tall. I was thinking a lot of my mother that day, how this had been impossible in her lifetime, how I thought it would have been impossible on my own. In less than a minute, after 232 years, Barack Hussein Obama was a funny name, and the blackface was sworn in as President of the United States of America and leader of the free world. Don't tell me change is impossible. Something changed. Something changed to make that possible. If we can eliminate ashtrays from the world I'm from, where everyone smoked, or I wanted to smoke. If we can elect an African-American president to 2 terms in the White House, from the childhood I remember, where racism was tolerated every single day in this country, and sometimes applauded. If we can do that, we can do this. We can learn the 5 basic signs of mental illness and finally start talking about it without judgment or stigma or shadow or shame, and help those who are suffering. I know statistically there are young people in this auditorium today who are suffering with a mental health problem. You need to know it's not your fault. There's no shame in it, and help is possible. You don't need to be suffering, but you don't need to be ashamed of it. It's okay not to feel okay. It's just not okay to pretend you do. That's what your generation is going to have to change. You don't have to buy an airline ticket or march on a cold day. You just have to open your heart and open your mind. Most of you in this auditorium will have children of your own one day. I can tell you right now, some of them will have a mental health challenge. No shame in that. My own son did. I just was ignorant. I made bad choices. Hopefully you won't. Help is possible. On the back of this card is something called R.E.A.C.T. How do we react if we see the sign? The one thing you don't do is pretend you don't see them, or make people feel badly. It's just wrong. I've been doing this now for 3.5 years, and I drive a lot of nights to schools. They want you there at 8 in the morning. And sometimes it's snowing or on my back roads. If it weren't for Siri, I'd be lost half of my life. I love that woman. And some of those night trips, I'm going to be honest with you, I think to myself, maybe this is a fool's errand. Maybe I'm the only one that cares about it. It's easy to feel that way, by the way. And then I have an experience like I had about 6 months ago in a middle school in southern New Hampshire. I spoke to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students who were seated on the gym floor. I was probably the oldest person that ever spoken in a middle school. And I spoke just as I spoke to all of you. And they listened. That should tell you something. And when I was done, they were walking to the exit. I was over there with the principal. The young man was leaving, and he extended his right hand to shake mine. told me his name and his age. He was 13. He was an 8th grader, he said, I want to thank you for coming to my school today. I said, you're very welcome. I was happy to be here. He said, I want to tell you why I'm thanking you. I said, sure. He said, they tell me here at the school that I'm on the spectrum myself. And your talk here today has changed my whole life. I said, can I give you a hug? We started hugging, he was crying. And my eyes watered too. I hadn't changed his whole life. But I'll bet for the first time in his young life, he felt comfortable telling someone he did not know, but who he knew would not judge him for his challenges, what those challenges were. It mattered to that kid. That young man should be able to hug anyone, tell anyone, and not feel that he's risking anything. It's true for kids with mental illness, too. Anyway, I need your help. I can't do it by myself, but we could. I brought these cards today. Hopefully you'll get them. I've given out over 400,000 of these. I don't mean drop them from an airplane. I mean giving them out. I'd like one on every work carol, every headmaster and principal's office, maybe in your dorm room or your refrigerator at home. What are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? Anyway, thanks for listening. It's an honor to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Broderick. We're honored that you spoke. Thank you to those in the auditorium who listened. And again, for some of you, I know this message is a hard one to hear, but a super important one to hear. Mr. Broderick is going to stay for about 20 minutes. If people do want to come down and speak with him, he's certainly open to that. I know that we have class in 5 minutes or 4 minutes or something like that, but I have a card for each one of you, and I will get it to you, probably through your dorms and day rooms. And again, thank you, Judge, and thank you all.